All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live right now for a little APUSH review. And so go ahead and get your questions in. We're going to go ahead and let social media know that we're here. I think that would be a good idea. So let me go ahead while we're waiting on some questions. The focus tonight is going to be on populism. But again, if your class is somewhere else and you want to have some questions, I can answer questions about anything tonight. Okay, so it's just that I have the focus area, but you are welcome to ask whatever questions. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and let's see. I'm going to let Instagram know that I'm currently doing an APUSH review with Fiveable. Go to fiveable.me for more information on that. All right, so Instagram knows that we're here. Y'all go ahead, let me know what's going on, okay? So fiveable.me. So let's see. Okay, still waiting on some questions. And if I don't have any questions in a few minutes, I'll just get started on, talking about populism in general. All right, so y'all just let me know, but I want to make sure that we're getting your stuff here. Okay, so let's see. All right. Oh, good. We've got a question. Okay, that is excellent. Very glad to see this. Okay, very glad to see a question coming in. All right, so let's go ahead and get this started. All right. Okay, what were the goals of the Populist Party? I'm going to definitely get to that, okay, as part of the main presentation there. So let me go ahead and get pull that up. And remember, any questions that y'all got, okay, any questions that y'all got can be asked. That's always welcome. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this pulled up. And yes, get those questions in. Get those questions in. All right. Okay. Pulling that up now. All right, 13 column, let's say. Okay, this one I'm done with. Just getting all my ducks in a row here on my PowerPoint. All right, so we've got a question that's really about populism. I need some context there. Now, before I do that, let me go ahead and get this one. Stefania, okay, you're asking me about the Reconstruction era, okay? So the moderate and radical Republicans, this is very important to understanding the Civil War and Reconstruction, and really to understanding U.S. government as well. You've got in the Democratic and the Republican Party today. Anytime you've got a two-party system, it's a coalition of different groups, okay, that you're not going to find when the party has to get half the voters in order to be in power. It's not just going to be one group. It's going to be several groups, okay? So as far as moderate Republicans, okay, that would be Lincoln's faction of the Republican Party. Now, remember that although the Civil War ended up, resolving the whole slavery thing, Abraham Lincoln was very clear from the get-go that his objective in fighting the war was to preserve the Union. Okay, so for him, that was the main thing. Now, of course, as the war went on, those aims changed. They didn't really change. He added to them. Okay, preserve the Union's always going to be his biggest deal. But what Abraham Lincoln did was he demanded that the southern states emancipate slaves, okay, that they emancipate. Now, when it comes down to it, emancipation did not necessarily mean full citizenship or voting rights or anything like that. It was just get rid of slavery. So when you look at the 13th Amendment, okay, so presidential Reconstruction, that's what we associate with Abraham Lincoln. Of course, Andrew Johnson, who wasn't a Republican, but was Lincoln's vice president. And so as far as this goes, that Lincoln was like, look, 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, and other than that, it didn't do anything, okay? That's it. And remember that Dred Scott was still the law of the land, which said that people of African descent could not be citizens of the United States. So for Abraham Lincoln, that was enough for the time being, okay? But radical Republicans, they wanted to pursue full voting rights and full citizenship for African Americans. Some of them favored a redistribution of land, which never really happened, okay? But but they favored taking land from former Confederates, redistributing it amongst the slaves, and then, or the former slaves, the freedmen and women. Okay, and then they wanted to punish the Confederacy. You know, Lincoln, in his second inaugural address, he said, with malice toward none and charity for all. Okay, that basically, you know, once this war's over, I want to make nice with everybody. And the radical Republicans weren't having it. And so Lincoln, according to the radicals, didn't go far enough. Okay, so it's the 14th Amendment that said that anyone born in the United States and subject to the laws thereof, that person is a citizen of the United States. And of course, the 15th Amendment saying that somebody could not be denied the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. And so those are the goals of the radical Republicans. And of course, we also saw that with the Wade-Davis bill. Okay, the Wade-Davis bill, which was sorry about that. Let me grab my water, make sure I've got this. Make sure to stay hydrated, everybody, because when you get a cough, it is hard to shake. Like I tell you, those things, cough will stay with me for like 3 weeks at least. Okay, so that's what we're looking at as far as the moderate Republicans and the radical Republicans. The Lincoln Republicans, presidential Reconstruction, the war was about preserving the Union, and later about emancipation. And then the radicals, who were about, you know what, military rule in the South, punish the Confederacy, and also extend voting rights and full citizenship rights to African Americans. And so remember that the radical Republicans, Ulysses S. Grant was supportive of radical Reconstruction. And then he was succeeded by James Garfield. And that was part of the Compromise of 1877, where James Garfield assumed office in a disputed election. So he assumed office, but Garfield was from the more moderate side of the Republican Party. So part of this was that he pulled out all of the remaining federal troops from South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida, where they had still been enforcing Republican rule there. And so that's where you've got pretty much the ascendancy of the moderates, where you saw that the radicals had control during radical Reconstruction. So hopefully that was helpful in answering your question. And I'll get to the main thrust of everything on the Populist very shortly. All right, so let's go. Okay, so we've got 3 questions about the Populist. Okay, now I don't know if I'll mention this specifically, but just to be clear, the Omaha Platform, okay, was significant for the Populist Party because it was the 1892 platform. So the 1892 was the year that the Populists ran for, they first organized and ran a candidate for office and got a few electoral votes in the Great Plains, but never really could get traction in the South due to the Solid South phenomenon. Okay. Okay. And speaking of, let me go ahead and answer this real quick, that there were a lot of people who wanted better working conditions, that sort of thing. Okay. But then you've got to remember the phenomenon of the Solid South, that there were a lot of poor white farmers who might have gone along with that. And also, the thing is, there were some people trying to get, black and white farmers to get on the same ticket and vote together. But I don't think they were really ready for that at the time. But the South at this time was very, very loyal after Reconstruction, like basically between Reconstruction and World War II, the South, the former Confederate states, very fiercely loyal to the Democratic Party. Okay, that white Southerners, were basically tied to the Democratic Party, and that was where a lot of that support could have come from, was in the South. And so that was where in 1896, it's about the closest the Populists could come, was endorsing a Democratic candidate who had some populist ideas, okay, William Jennings Bryan, and that's the closest they could come to the White House. So then again, and I think also because the party really never succeeded in, reaching out to urban like laborers. Okay, so it remained really a farmers' party more than anything else. All right, so with that in mind, Carla's got the question about what were the goals of the Populist Party. So I'm going to go ahead and give us some needed context, and then we'll get into that. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to talk about, this is a lecture that I have not put, in this form. So, y'all are seeing something that is actually not available right now on my YouTube channel. So as far as that, this is what I call the last stand of the agrarians. Okay. So this is, the farmers revolt here. Okay. So that's going to lead to populism. And so as far as that goes, urban and rural shifts. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look here. For some reason, I can't find where I would be able to, let's see. Okay, this is just not wanting me to, I want to zoom in, but it's not letting me zoom in. And let me make sure I'm still sharing my screen. Okay, it looks like I am. Okay, so as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, y'all might not be able to read this along with me, but I'll let you know what everything says. Okay, so in 1790, 95% of Americans lived in rural areas. Okay, so only 5% of Americans lived in cities and urban areas. Now, that explains why very early on, Jefferson's party was able to have so much success, because his party appealed to farmers, and farmers were pretty much the country at that time. And so, as we go along, we see that in 1820, the era of good feelings, still over 90%. 1830, the Jacksonian era, 1840, we're still seeing about 9 out of 10 Americans, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. I mean, this is a nation that is 90% rural. And so as we get to the American Civil War, okay, it's actually picked up quite a bit, but still 4 out of 5 Americans lived in rural areas. And it's not until 1920, the 1920 census, where we see that, and this is, we could get into continuity and change over time here, okay? So the 1920 census, we see finally that 48.8% of Americans lived in rural areas, 51.2% in urban areas. Now, the latest I've got on this here is 1990, but when you look here, really at least 3 out of 4 Americans today live in urban areas. Okay, so rural Americans make up a minority of the country. Only about a quarter of Americans, at least in 1990, it may even be more now, live in rural areas. And so as far as that goes, when we look at 1890, the country is still 65% rural, but not everyone is a farmer. I mean, there's a big difference between 95% and 65%. And so the farmers feel like that they have been forgotten about, they have been left behind. But the United States has this rich tradition of agriculture. Some of y'all may be a little young to have seen the Super Bowl commercial years ago, that it was a Dodge Ram commercial that really got a lot of praise at that time. Okay, and the commercial said, it kind of goes along here. It says, "So God made a farmer." Okay, you can see here 23 million views. This was in 2013, so it's about I guess about 6 years ago. It was a Super Bowl ad. And so with that, we can see that, there's still this like nostalgia that goes along. Like, even though very few Americans today, only about like 2%, 2 to 3% of Americans live on farms today, or, farm for a living, because of some of the things I'm going to mention in a little bit. But we all kind of feel this tie. Like, it resonated with so many people, because it's almost a part of our, of our DNA as Americans. If we think like 3 generations back, odds are your relatives are on a farm. And so Thomas Jefferson, the champion of the farmer. But by the 1890s, this is from Puck magazine, which was a Democratic leading publication at that time. And you can see here an article called "The Forgotten Farmer." Okay, so this is a time when farmers felt left out. Okay. And what they show here is that you could put, you could divide Americans into three groups. Okay. You can divide Americans into farmers, professionals, white collar workers, and then laborers. Okay. So the farmer, the laborer, and the professional. Now, at this time, laborers and professionals, when you add them together, they made up a majority. Okay. So farmers, for the first time, are finding themselves in the minority in the United States. And the thing is, though, they still were the single largest group. Okay. So even though they're no longer the majority, they're still the single largest group. And that's why, it made some waves when they decided that they were going to vie for political power. Now, we have to understand the whole idea of mechanized farming. That's a big deal about what's going on here, because agricultural production is going way up. Okay. So Jesus told a lot of agricultural parables, where he talks about, John the Baptist is talking about a winnowing fork, and he will clear his threshing floor, gathering his wheat into the barn and burning up the chaff with unquenchable fire. Now, the thing is, most of us never seen a winnowing fork. Okay. I mean, this is not something that we think, oh, yeah, I know what that is. This is a threshing floor. Okay. Now, this is in Greece, I believe, but this is a threshing floor. And, most of us have never seen this. We've never actually seen someone thresh wheat because they have machines for that now. Okay. So 18 centuries, by the time you get to even like 1750, very little has changed about farming. That, the words that, Jesus and John the Baptist used, 1800 years ago, that they're still making sense to people, but not so much now. Okay. Mechanized farming. All right. Today, picking cotton is basically sitting in an air conditioned thing there, listening to your music and going through and letting the machine do all the work for you. So this is really getting started in the mid to late 19th century. Of course, when we see American industrialization, we see a similar thing here. So there's a mechanical threshing machine there. So now, you don't have to have a threshing floor here. It's a partly automated process. Now, the McCormick reaper. So no longer are people going out there and swinging their blades and cutting off the wheat. You've got this reaper that you just tie a couple horses to it. Looks like you got a steam engine right there that's working, if I'm not mistaken there. Or maybe that's something else. I don't know, because you got horses. Do you need a steam engine? I'm not sure. I'm not a mechanic. Okay. But what we're seeing here is very efficient. Okay. Every McCormick reaper freed 5 men to fight for the Union. That's what was said at that time, that, one of these machines could replace 5 people. And so with that, now, not that, everybody wanted to fight in the war. Some people didn't. But at the same time, we see that this technology is creating economic growth. And you're seeing this, this boost in agricultural production because of this increased technology. And so now when we look at this, the other side of this is the tariff. Okay. So at that time, we see that, there is the farmer, the laborer. The laborer looks kind of like a cook, like with his hat there. The farmer and the laborer and the monopolist. Okay. You can see here, that's the monopolist. And so they're putting it into, basically going to the tariff shrine, and they're paying taxes, and the monopolist is harvesting it. You see that there's the monopolist again with the protective tariff. When we see protection, the farmers are upset because Congress has passed laws in order to help big business, but they're not passing laws in order to help everyday Americans, in order to help everyday farmers. And so we see here where this one is called, and it's for some reason I can't get this this thing to go away here, but we'll just make do. This says, the caption here says division of labor. So there is the monopolist, and then there's the farmer who's paying all of the taxes. And so with that, he's got here the war tariff. Okay, so this is the stated purpose was to pay the debt from the Civil War, but what it was really doing was it was discouraging trade from other countries. So he's got this big old musket, Uncle Sam does, and John Bull from Britain, what are you carrying that bloated old-fashioned thing around for? To protect myself. Protect yourself from what? Against trade. Protect yourself against what? Against trade. So what's happening here is the high tariff is holding back trade. And we see here mercantile, which may be a reference here to mercantilism. All right, that we're going back to that mercantilist way of thinking, that we need to have these high tariffs in order to discourage trade to grow the local economy. And so this here is something that was passed around between farmers, that there is the U.S. price that they're paying for things like a cook stove and a corn planter and a hay press and a seed drill. So you could get this stuff here. You could pay, if you got it from foreign countries, they could make it cheaper and better. They had a more advanced in industry. And so what happened here is they said, look, I could buy British stuff for $439, but instead I'm paying $539. Now that's $100 a year, but if you multiply that by 20, which is what we have to do when we're going back that far, that's $2,000 a year that these farmers were having to pay if they were buying all these things. Okay, so these are things that they needed for their farm. So they're being squeezed on one hand with these prices of things, and on the other hand, their crop prices are low as well. Now, just a little review here, that when Hamilton first requested Congress to consider a protective tariff, what he wanted, he said that it's something to protect our infant industries. And so notice here that there is the infant industry, and we see that this industry's grown up. Okay, so by 1900, the United States is pretty much the definitely by the time of World War I. I want to make sure I'm not giving you the wrong year, but by the time World War I started, the United States was the biggest industrial producer in the world. And so why is it that the United States needs to be protected? Okay, these are not infant industries. Okay, so that's the whole point that's being made here. All right. So with that, we think about, you don't have to know the ins and outs of the supply and demand curve, but when we start to see, more of these products, okay, more of these products, then we're going to see the prices go down. So on one hand, it's more expensive. Okay, on one hand, it's more expensive it's more expensive for farmers to buy what they need. On the other hand, they're not getting as much for their crops. So it's kind of like, if you think about like the labor movement, and we're thinking about, what do you call it? What is that? I'm sorry, I'm having a what they call a Rick Perry moment a few years back. The rent is too high. It's the Pullman, yeah, I'm sorry. That was embarrassing. But it happens to the best of us. See, the Pullman Rail Car Company, okay? So the Pullman Rail Car Company is, when you saw that, their rent went up and they didn't get a raise to offset it, okay? So their wages were cut and the rent was not cut. Again, sorry about that. But they're in the same kind of situation here. Okay, so as far as that goes, their prices are going down. It's more expensive for them to buy what they need, and they're getting less money for their crops. Okay, so as far as that goes, agricultural production is going up, trade is going down, and then domestic consumption is going up, but not enough to justify, or not enough to offset the lower amount of trade. So you've got all of these agricultural surpluses, all right, all of this stuff that they've got there. So the prices are low and the farmers are really having a tough time, and they feel like nobody's listening to them. Yet they are the single largest group, okay? They are the single largest group. And so with that, they start to organize, okay? Because monopolists have formed trust laborers have formed unions. And so with that in mind, what about the farmers? What about the farmers getting together and doing something in order to advance their interests? All right. So as far as that goes, we've got the farmers really kind of an interest group. So they unite on a social, economic, and political level. Okay, so on one hand, you've got the social aspect, the Grange, the economic aspect, the farmers' alliances, and then finally, going to the political with the Populist Party. Okay, so that's going to set that up. Now, with that, let me go ahead and make sure that we don't have any new questions. I can take a little, I can take a little break here, from the presentation and see what we've got over here in our thing here. Okay, so as far as that goes, we'll get there. Okay. All of these, okay, would love to see the impact formed by these labor unions. Okay, Nicholas, I'm not sure if I quite understand your question. Okay, not quite sure if I exactly understand your question that we see here. When would we see the? Oh, what? Yeah, you're going to have to rephrase that question. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. Okay, so I've got questions about the goals of the Populist Party, the election of 1896, and yes, that was a crucial part of it. And then the gold standard. Okay, so let's go ahead and start taking a look there. And let's see, I'm going to mark somebody's. Let me see what question I'll mark having answered. Yeah, so it'll be the goals of the Populist Party in just a bit here. Okay, so as far as that goes, yeah, let me go ahead and click on. Let me go ahead and click on Carla's question here. Okay, so I'm going to kind of lead into that with what I'm going to do now. Okay, so we mentioned that you've got the Grangers, the Farmers Alliances, and the Populist Party. Okay, and this is all about getting the farmers to unite in favor of what they perceive to be their interest. Okay, so on a social level, the Grange, economic, the Farmers Alliances, and on a political level, the Populist Party. Now, the patrons of husbandry, otherwise known as the Grangers, all right, so this was an organization of farmers, okay, that are trying to, basically starts off kind of socially, okay. There are actually still some in some rural areas, Grange halls. Somebody told me one time that he used to watch Little House on the Prairie growing up, and the man would go to the meeting at the Grange Hall. So this was a very, basically kind of like a fraternity of farmers in a way. Now, farmers' alliances were economic cooperatives. What they tried to do was to, while the big companies were getting, preferential rates and stuff, they're like, you know what, maybe if we put all of our stuff together, we can get a better like shipping rate on the railroad or something like that. And you can see here when we look at the goals of the Populist, okay, the most good for the most people. Like instead of the government, being an agent of the few, why not an agent of the many? And then we see here free trade. Okay, so one of the things, even though the gold standard thing and bimetallism gets a lot more attention when we look at it historically, this free trade was one of their goals because they believed that the protective tariff, that was something that was helping the wealthy at the expense of the poor farmer. So the People's Party, otherwise known as the Populists. Now, remember that small p populist, okay? A populist is anybody who advocates for something like for a group that is not powerful, okay? So when we think about Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump, Ocasio-Cortez, these are all people who, there are different forms of populism, but they're speaking against the elite, okay? So there are so many kinds of populism. This is specifically an agrarian populism. And sometimes, the policies that they put out there may not be the most informed policies, but populist movements start because people don't feel like they're being listened to. So who were these people? Southern and Western farmers got together in 1892 in Omaha, Nebraska, to form a third party, okay, a third party, which is any party that is not the one of the two major parties. And so the Populist platform, what were their goals? Okay, so I divide these into political reform proposals and economic reform proposals. Now, first of all, the direct election of senators. Now, this is something that later comes across, across in the 17th Amendment. Okay, so the direct election of senators. Ballot initiatives, okay, so basically where you can bypass the legislature, you can get signatures and the people can put something directly on the ballot, and if they vote for it, it will become law. So it's kind of like recreational marijuana is not legal in California because the legislature passed a law. They have ballot initiatives in California. They call them propositions. But ballot initiatives, that means that the people, can go around the legislature and make laws directly. So as far as politics, they thought that both of these measures and also the secret ballot, that they would make the country more democratic, okay, that they would make it more of a democracy and less of an aristocracy or oligarchy. A secret ballot, people don't have to account for their vote to someone more powerful than they are. Ballot initiatives, so that people don't have to go through the legislature in order to make a law, and the direct election of senators, so that the legislature wasn't putting the senators up there, okay, that the people get to elect them on their own. Economic reform proposals. They wanted a graduated, or what we might call progressive income tax. Now, what that means is that the more money you make, the higher percentage of that money you pay. So somebody may have like a 10% tax bracket, and then the next person who makes more money, that money above a certain amount is taxed at 15%, then 20%, so on and so forth. Okay, so that basically the more money you have, then the more money you make, then the higher a percentage of it you're going to pay to the government. And that would weight the tax system to where the wealthy are paying more taxes, their fair share, so to speak, as you often hear from populists today. Unlimited coinage of silver. So at that time, the United States was on the gold standard, which meant that all of the money in the United States was backed by gold. The populists wanted unlimited coinage of silver, what we might call bimetallism. They also wanted the nationalization of the railroads. Now, by nationalization, I mean they wanted the government to take them over, okay? They didn't want the railroads to be held by private corporations. They wanted the government to take over the railroads and run them. So those are the goals of the Populist Party. Now, I always like to consider, I ask, is this a Jeffersonian movement? Now, on one hand, you might say, well, these are farmers, right? And they're trying to make the country more democratic, the government more responsive to the people. But remember that these things here, they are, nationalizing the railroads. I don't see any scenario where Thomas Jefferson would have thought it was a good idea for the government to own and operate the railroads. So those are the reforms that, that were suggested by the populists. Okay, that was their platform. So let me go ahead and mark that question as answered. And let's go ahead and talk about, so yes, let's see, Nicholas. I've already gone ahead and answered that question. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that one because that's something that we've answered already. All right, so as far as that goes, the gold standard. Okay, so why was the gold standard considered a burden? How would silver help alleviate their issues? Okay, now currency today is controlled by the Federal Reserve. Okay, now our currency has nothing behind it except for the government's guarantee. Like, our currency is worth something because the government says it is, and for the most part, the government can be relied upon to not, overprint currency. Okay, so but at that time, the biggest advantage of the gold standard is that money has value. If you think about what happened, in Germany in the 1920s, or even in the United States in the 1970s, just all of this inflation, where the inflation is outpacing economic growth. Now, inflation at like 2 to 3% a year, not a big deal. You expect that because the economy is growing. And so as far as that goes, if it's backed by gold, you're not going to see inflation because it's got something to back it up, that the money value is tied to something else. So that means that if I go to the bank and I put my money in the bank, I know that when I come back for that money, it's going to be worth the same thing. Even if I come back years later, that money's not going to lose value. And so basically the populist, the problem is that the gold standard at that time, it limited the amount of currency that could be in circulation. And for the farmers, I mean, there has to be a certain amount of currency in circulation for the economy to work. And if there's not enough, people are going to suffer from that. Now, if it's too much, then you've got the problems of inflation. So, the farmers, they were the people without money. Now, the people with money want to make sure they are the most attached to the gold standard, because the people with money, those are the people who lose in the case that, you abandon the gold standard and have more currency. So the populist wanted more currency, but the issue is that, when you talk about unlimited coinage of silver, while it would put more currency in circulation, solve that problem, the concern was that it was going to be highly inflationary, okay, that there was going to be a huge, inflation effect there. So as far as that goes, finish with that. Now, how did populism play a role in the election of 1896? Okay. Now, Liba, I'm going to get to this in the course of my presentation here, but just the short answer to your question is that the populists in 1896, after the Democrats nominated William Jennings Bryan, who was an advocate of bimetallism, the populists just endorsed William Jennings Bryan. They didn't try to put their own candidate up for re-election. So you had an alliance between the populist and the Democratic Party. Now, of course, there are some Democrats, some more moderate Democrats that, actually voted for the Republican candidate that year, because they didn't want William Jennings Bryan to win, because he was advocating things that they thought would lead to massive inflation. All right. So as far as that goes, let's go ahead and continue, and feel free to ask any more questions if you have it. And remember, I don't necessarily have to answer questions about populism. They can be about any subject. Okay. So as far as that goes, all right, let me go and get back to this. Okay, so the money supply. Now, just like we were talking about crop prices, the money supply is very similar, okay? The more money's in circulation, the more money that's in circulation, the less that money's going to be worth. So if you print more money, you're going to see that that money's not going to be worth as much. So the gold standard gives you sound money. Okay, this is money that you can count on, and it has what's called a store of value. That's what I was saying, and that's the proper economics term for what I was saying about the money's going to be worth the same thing 10 years down the road. You don't have to worry about it losing value. And so it's something that's very good for guarding against inflation. Now, bimetallism, remember, that is about gold and silver being used to back currency. So two forms of currency in a 16-to-1 ratio. Okay, they recommended that you have a 16-to-1, 16 silver for every gold. So they wanted to create not just a little more currency, but but a good bit. So in the 1892 presidential election, you see that the populists carried 1, 2, 3, 4 states and got a couple of electoral votes from other states. Okay, so Nevada, Idaho, Colorado, and Kansas. All right. So as far as that goes, they're not really, now as far as the popular vote, they took 9% of the popular vote and 5% of the electoral vote. Now, another thing is that the populist in 1892 nominated a guy who had been a Union general or officer or something like that. And so that wasn't making a lot of friends among white Southerners who controlled the electoral process in these states. All right. So as far as that goes, the Panic of 1893. Okay. So the economy, very, very bad at that time. So right after the 1892 election, you have this panic. And the election of 1896. Now, the panic is kind of subsiding by this time, but there are a lot of people who still remember it. And you see here William Jennings Bryan, the Democrat from Nebraska, versus William McKinley, the Republican of Ohio. And William Jennings Bryan famously delivered his Cross of Gold speech, okay, where he said, if protection has slain its thousands, the gold standard had slain its tens of thousands. Now, William Jennings Bryan was a very religious man. He wasn't mocking the Bible. He thought, he's being portrayed here as mocking the Bible, but that certainly wasn't his intention, okay? So, as far as that goes, like there's a crown of thorns used by Bryan in campaign speeches. There he is with his foot on the Bible. We see anarchy here, and we see a church that looks like it's been burned or gutted. So it's like if you vote for Bryan, you are going to plunge the nation into turmoil. All right. And so as far as that goes, we see here so protection, the protective tariff, they're against that. And then the gold standard, they're against that. You shall not press upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Okay, so he's using these religious metaphors, and the populists end up endorsing Bryan because he's got their issues. Now, at the same time, on one hand, it's like, thank you for your vote. But then again, it's just like, remember when David Duke, who is a noted, white nationalist type, spoke well of Donald Trump. It's like, it's not that, Trump's wasn't really eager to get that support. Okay. Because the populists, for a lot of people, these were scary people because they're advocating things that most people believed would wreck the economy. And so we see here a Republican political cartoon. They're making note of William McKinley, his war service, while William Jennings Bryan was a baby in 1861. So they're saying that William Jennings Bryan is not fit to lead. He's too young and he's too reckless. And that doesn't stop Bryan from trying, okay? William Jennings Bryan goes on this huge railroad tour, and actually two of them, whereas William McKinley ran a front porch campaign, okay? Bryan's campaign tour, the first one took him through the Midwest. Now, of course, the Midwest is where the votes are, all right? That's where the votes are. Now, the second train, or third or fourth trip or whatever, he'd spent most of his time in the Midwest, but note that he also went to his home state of Nebraska for a bit. It went through the Midwest, spent most of his time there, but also went through the Upper South and then a little bit to New England. So that he's doing something that, he's going into places that even into the Republican stronghold, which politically might not have been the best thing since McKinley kind of had this locked down at the time. But there's McKinley's front porch campaign that basically he let people come to him and do interviews. And so Mark Hanna was his campaign manager. I don't think you'll see his name on the exam, but he was a monopolist turned campaign manager. And the keys to any political victory: first of all, money. How much money does your campaign have? And two, fear. How much can you scare people? How much money does your campaign have? How effectively can your campaign scare people? And if you can have an advantage in both of those, then you win. Okay, so there is, Mark Hanna with his pants that have dollar signs on them, and basically showing that they're bribing the labor unions in order to get the labor vote. And so then you look here that as far as that goes, that William McKinley saying, I do not know what you think about it, but I believe it is a good deal to open up the mills of the United States to the labor of America than to open up the mints of the United States to the silver of the world. Okay, so he is making people afraid of bimetallism, of free silver. In God we trust for the other 47 cents. So what we see here is the Republicans are saying, you vote for Bryan, the currency will lose value. And then they passed around these dollars, which vote for McKinley and 100 cents. Okay, vote for McKinley and 100 cents. Here is a free silver dime. Okay, so when they pass these out, that this appears to be $1. But if you vote for William Jennings Bryan, it is going to be only a dime. And so it's it's kind of sad in a way for Bryan, because when you read the Horatio Alger stories, these were stories about, boys who worked very hard, and they worked hard and their hard work paid off. That when you work hard, you always are successful. Not always the case. Now, it came pretty close. In the popular vote, 47% to 51%. Now, notice since Bryan was a Democrat, he had the South in the bag, okay? And then you notice he's got, he's got the mountain states. This looks kind of like, now with the exception of the Midwest and the state of Washington, Nevada, it's very much like the current Republican coalition. What you see there voting Democratic, of course, with some exceptions. And so then you see here where free silver has been kept out of the White House. And so the sound money scare, okay, we all want more money, but we also want our money to be worth something. And so there is William McKinley. There's his campaign manager, Mark Hanna. They're about to, carve up the turkey, and they won because of the sound money vote. Okay. And of course, there was a rematch in 1900. William Jennings Bryan ran. William Jennings Bryan was the Democratic candidate 3 times. There's actually a slogan from William Howard Taft's campaign in 1912. And what it said was, vote for Taft this time. You can vote for Bryan anytime. And so that was kind of a running joke there. Bryan ran for president 3 times, lost, kind of like the Henry Clay of his time. Now, how would the populist movement contribute to the progressive era? Now, the populists and the progressives, of course, they're 2 different groups of people, because the populists were rural farmers, whereas the progressives were white-collar, professional business types. Okay, so they were people who were professionals. Their leaders had, were very well educated. And they both were united in the idea that they wanted business regulated. Okay, they wanted to see business regulated. They wanted they wanted the rich to pay their fair share in taxes. They believed that the rich, were getting away with not paying as many taxes as working people. And then basically they want to regulate business, and they want to, taxation to be more, as they saw it, more equitable, and, really wanted a larger role for the federal government. Okay, so the populists, when they said things like want direct election of senators, the progressives picked that up. We want initiative referendum recall, that sort of thing. The progressives picked that up. So, as far in income tax, the graduated income tax, the progressives picked that up. And the 16th Amendment passed during Woodrow Wilson's term in office, you saw with that, the income tax. And of course, the 17th, the direct election of senators. So these are things that the progressives and the populists, they have some overlap with the issues that they advocated for, even though they were 2 very different groups of people. And so were the populists, were they 2 separate groups? Yes, they were 2 very separate groups. Again, you've got with the populists, these are agrarian farmers who are being, who feel left behind. They are rural in a society that's becoming increasingly organized. The progressives, again, white collar types, professionals that are looking to redefine the role of government for the 20th century. Okay, they believe that you needed a new form of, a new type of government, a government that's willing to take a more active role, and especially a role in protecting people who are less fortunate and that sort of thing. Okay, thank you, Jody, for that question. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hang out here for just a few more minutes in case anybody's got a question for me. If anybody's got a question for me, good to see you here, Dylan. Good to see people here that I recognize from Twitter. All right, and so we got some folks here. All right, going to hang around just a little bit more. We're going to see if any more questions come in. If not, if we don't see any more questions, I've had a very nice session. I appreciate you joining us. And remember that replays are available if you join Fiveable. So you can find out some more information about that at fiveable.me. Okay, fiveable.me. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, okay, there's a question. All right, good deal. Okay, now I've heard this before. I'm not, too familiar with it, but the yellow brick road, I think, I've heard that that's an allegory for the gold standard or something like that. So that's certainly been something. I don't think it's without merit. I'm not really qualified to comment, but I have heard people that are, more attuned to this. I've got a buddy who's actually has a PhD, that, he wrote his doctoral dissertation on Ben Tillman and the populist movement in South Carolina. And he said something about that before. So I think there may be something to that. That's not something that is, something that I claim to know really anything about any more than the next guy. All right. So with the Populist Party land. Okay. So yeah, Dylan, I would say now what's interesting about this, I think that when you're looking at that today, well, it's kind of tough because when it comes down to it, you think, okay, these forgotten agrarian people, it sounds a lot like the Trump coalition. But at the same time, Donald Trump talks about less regulation, lower taxes, stuff like that. So on one hand, it sounds like, kind of like what I said about Jefferson earlier, that these are farmers, but they didn't necessarily they're farmers, but they're not necessarily Jeffersonian. So when you look at it, I mean, it's really, as far as the issues they want, they're asking for more government, for higher taxes for the rich. So a lot of things that they're asking for really sound more like something you might see out of the Democratic Party, even though when you look at the demographic, it looks a lot more like the Trump coalition than anything else. But interesting question there. And I think that's part of the fun of studying history, is considering stuff like that. All right. Well, yeah, I'm glad I can help you, Nicholas. And it looks like you got Thomas Jefferson there. I'm always happy to see Thomas Jefferson, a hero of mine. So thank y'all so much for joining us. All right. Well, I will see y'all at the same time next week at 7 p.m. Oh, never mind. I've got some more questions coming in. So thank y'all. All right. Now, as far as that goes, Anna, that typically Democrats were anti-tariff. Now, I don't think that there was a lot of movement on the tariff during Cleveland's presidential terms, but yeah, I mean, the Democrats, because the Democrats represented the farmers in the rural areas. Let me see something about that. The Wilson, now I wouldn't get too deep into these weeds, okay? But this is, okay, so basically the Wilson-Gorman Tariff Act, that was, 1892, Grover Cleveland was elected. So during Grover Cleveland's presidency, there was a slight, okay, so there was a, so as far as that goes, a slight reduction in the 1890 McKinley tariff, okay, and imposed a 2% income tax. Now, the thing is, I think this is where the income tax was ruled unconstitutional, okay? The purpose of the tax, Democrats, yada, yada, yada. Let's see. Yeah, so the income tax was struck down in 1895 by the U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, so the U.S. Supreme Court said that the income tax on individual incomes was unconstitutional. Okay, so it was a 2% tax on people who made the equivalent of $88,000 today. Okay, so, and even that meant that fewer than 1% of households would actually pay the tax. But they said, nope, can't do it. That is unconstitutional. So the progressives came in and did something else later on, okay, and amended the Constitution. So that's what you're seeing there. So there was a slight reduction in the tariff during during Cleveland's second non-consecutive term, whereas Harrison would have been, he was a Republican and he was the president when the McKinley tariff passed. And so as far as that, yeah, I'm always, you don't have to necessarily, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be populism related. So as far as that goes, okay, yeah, now, Liba, I have already got a video on the APUSH DBQ on YouTube. If you type in APUSH DBQ, you'll see the video that I've put there. And I will be doing an APUSH LEQ video very, very, very soon. Okay, that's going to be coming up. I would say I wouldn't be surprised if I saw it in the next week because I've been working on some stuff there. So I will get an APUSH LEQ video up. So we'll make sure that that's happening. Okay. So as far as that goes, the DBQ video is already up. The LEQ video is on its way. It's something that is very high up on my list, and I'll make sure, I know you're looking for it, so I'll make sure to get that done for you. All right, again, last call. Okay, yeah, and thank y'all very much, and it's been very much a pleasure being here with y'all, and I will see y'all again in another week. All right, see y'all next week, ladies and gentlemen. Very nice to have y'all here, and always a pleasure.